Hello and welcome to the Bylund Clinic Podcast number 2. If you joined me for podcast episode number 1, I am super thankful that you came back here to listen to podcast number 2. And we're actually going to kind of dive into some content here today, talking specifically about psychoeducational evaluations and my number one personal pet peeve with those. But before we dive into that any further, I just want to remind you that if you have any suggestions or questions for me about the podcast or anything else professionally, just please, I encourage you to reach out to me at info@drjamesbylund.com. That's info@drjamesbylund.com. Or, of course, you can follow me on social media, Instagram and Facebook at the Bylund Clinic. And you can certainly connect with me that way as well. And if you haven't seen those accounts yet, I'd encourage you to do so. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm not too savvy when it comes to all this social media stuff, although I'm learning a little bit, kind of here as I go along. Nothing that I've ever really done personally, so I'm trying to learn it here professionally. So, but at any rate, I do have those accounts going now, and on those accounts, share a lot of information that's similar to what we discuss here on the podcast. So things related to learning disabilities and ADHD and other developmental disorders and psychoeducational evaluations and IEP process, and just like this podcast, really do that to be a resource to parents of kids with known or suspected disabilities, or even for other helping professionals who work with children and youth with learning and other developmental disorders too. So hopefully you've checked me out there. If not, please do so. Follow me. And hopefully there I'm providing some information that's useful for you, right? So check that out. As I've said before, and bears repeating, right? In any one of these episodes, certainly I'm not providing any legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not providing any information that is specific to you or your child or anybody else you know. So I'm not making any diagnoses or treatment recommendations here. If you have those types of questions specific to you and your situation, you need to reach out to a professional and get answers to those questions. So again, with all that said, let's jump in here, because I'm going to talk about I don't know. It's hard to say number one, right? But it could easily be my number one pet peeve with psychoeducational and neuropsychological evaluations. Now, it's not trying to be the pot calling the kettle black here. I'm not perfect about this. This is writing psychoeducational and neuropsychological assessment reports is difficult. There's a lot of skill involved in doing it well. And it's something that I'm continually working on and evolving and trying to do a better job of it. But here's my number one pet peeve, right? My number one pet peeve is no one understands what the hell they say. Period, right? I don't know who these people are writing the reports for. Perhaps other psychologists, because another psychologist and frankly, only a psychologist who does testing for a living would ever understand what the heck is in any one of these reports. Now, the reason why that's such a problem for me is because a psychologist shares the information out with a parent, perhaps in a meeting, or if it's a situation involving the school, there's an IEP team meeting, right, where all these professionals and parents get together to discuss these assessment reports. Now, the assessment results in those situations are then the basis of everything else that comes after it, right? The assessment report determines the child's needs, which helps the team to develop appropriate goals and determine appropriate services. And for parents and teachers then to be able to really understand this child and what the barriers are to their learning so that they can then do something to help, right? The psychologist isn't helping, right? Beyond that point, right? They're sharing this information. Now, it would make sense then, at least in my mind, that these reports would be written in a way in which it might make some sense, even just a little bit, right, to parents and teachers, man, because these things just don't. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But the conversation's not going to end today, right? This is actually such a big topic that we're going to dedicate a lot of episodes to looking at different aspects of this, right? Like what exactly these disabilities are, what all these areas of psychological processing mean, right? Because it's all these sort of abstract foreign concepts to everybody, right? And not just what they mean, but what the implications are then for why a child might be struggling with some aspects of their learning, and what treatment or intervention recommendations are appropriate then based on those profiles. But for starters, I'd like to give some examples of what I'm talking about, right? About how these things just don't make any sense. And again, if you're a testing psychologist and you're listening to this, I don't mean this to be offensive in any way. I feel your pain. I am in the same boat as you in trying to explain this information to other people. But if you are, I hope that you listen to this with an open mind, right? And realize, if you haven't already, that nobody understands what is in your assessment report. They just don't, right? And all the time you spend reviewing it at an IP meeting, for example, pause for a second and look around the room, because I guarantee you everybody's eyes have kind of glazed over, and they're kind of nodding along to be polite, not because they understand what's in your report. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit. Now, here's the deal, right? I have lots of these laying around, right? Or access to them in my client's records, and I could have picked one from maybe first or second year school psychologist as an example, somebody who really doesn't know what they're doing yet, and is sort of new to all of this. I didn't. Okay, I actually picked an example of somebody who's known throughout the state of California as a school psychologist, really a sort of leader in the field of school psychology. And this isn't a knock on that individual at all. I have a lot of respect for this individual. But I thought, gosh, if we could pick their report and take a look at what it is that I'm talking about, and they're one of the best, right? Then imagine what some of the rest might look like, right? So I'm just going to pull out some examples, right? There's no names or anything like that here, right? That wouldn't be fair to do that. But just to kind of give a flavor for what it is that parents, and maybe you're a parent, are dealing with here, right? Because this is just, it's a freaking foreign language. I don't know how anyone in the world understands what the heck is in these reports, right? So here's this report, right, by this really sort of top-notch leader, right, in the field of school psychology. So I'm just going to read some examples, just going to read some examples of what's in here, right? So, all right, so let's see here. So bear with me, okay? I'm going to do my best to do this here, right? So it says, throughout, and this is the beginning, right? This is to kind of help explain to you as the reader, like how you can now better understand and interpret this data here, right? So sort of the section on clinical interpretations and findings, right? So it says, throughout the report, standardized test scores are provided, followed by discussion of how a student's performance is best interpreted. The qualitative descriptors used to label these standardized scores are not consistent across test makers. Some tests have wider or narrower ranges, different labels, or the same label, but for a much different area. This often makes for confusing interpretations. Yeah, no kidding, right? No kidding, that makes for... Your explanation is confusing. I understand what they're saying, right? But just imagine, right, for everybody else, right? Like, what? Like okay, if that meant I should be confused, you are correct. I am already confused, right? But goes on for, I'll read one more sentence of this and then go on to another section, right? So, therefore, for the sake of statistical consistency and logical interpretations, we will use the above descriptors. And it's funny because it says use the above descriptors, and the descriptors are actually below, so that's kind of a little confusing in and of itself. But does that help you to make logical interpretations of this information after having read that, right? I don't know, pretty confusing. Now, this is a 30-page report here, so I'm not going to read to you the whole 30-page report. That would be torturous, right, for anybody to try to go through a 30-page report like this, written in that type of language, right? But let me flip ahead here and see if I can find something else. Oh, how about this, right? Because this is language that we use in our day-to-day life, right? So, overall estimate of student cognitive functioning is better represented by his nonverbal index, NVI, rather than his fluid crystallized index, FCI, given that the FCI includes scores that are impacted far more by areas of weakness and therefore underrepresents his abilities. Now, nonverbal index, fluid crystallized index, I bet you've never heard those words combined in that way before ever in your entire life. Until you read this report, right? Which is why this report doesn't make any darn sense. So let's get ahead here, right? Oh, I like this one. This one's nice. This is this really nice sentence here, right? So the chart below, again, it's funny, right? Because before he said the chart above, and the chart was actually below. And here it says the chart below, but the chart's actually above. I don't know. This is kind of confusing here, but I'm doing my best. So the chart below reports scores from selected subtests from the NEPSY-2, that's NEPSY-2, CTOPS, and it's actually the CTOP, but CTOPS-2, and KBC-2NU, organized by cognitive ability area according to cross-battery assessment XBA technique based on factor analytic loading of subtests. Cells that are darkened represent overall estimates that have been calculated using XBA formula. Okay, please. Oh my God. Please. Did you understand that? If you did, go on my Instagram and say so. Because if you did, I believe, to be honest with you, I did. I know what they're talking about, right? I know all the tests. I know what it is they're referring to. But if you don't do this for a living, right, and you understood that, wow, congratulations. That is amazing. Really, really, truly amazing, because that wouldn't make sense to anybody, I don't think, right? Gosh, I don't know. There's so many examples in here. Let me see here. Let's just try this one, right? So here they're talking about what they call cognitive conceptualization, right? That's an easy one, right? Cognitive conceptualization, right, is the process of using information in an increasingly more complex and fluid manner. This is often called abstract thinking, fluid reasoning, or simply reasoning, the ability to solve problems, that is, problems that cannot be solved by relying on previous situations or solutions. This processing area allows a person to make generalizations or inferences. It is comprised of general sequential reasoning, the ability to reason logically using established premises and principles, induction, the ability to observe a problem and understand the underlying rules or principles that will govern the outcome, being able to generalize from specific situations to others. Right, it's like, I think you're getting a flavor of what it is I'm talking about, right? Like, so a parent or a teacher is supposed to pick this up, read that confusing as heck series of sentences, I'm not sure what else to call it, and then look at a chart that has a bunch of numbers that are foreign to everybody, and then somehow piece all of that together so that it makes some resemblance of sense to anybody to be able to make decisions on, right? It just doesn't, right? And the more I think about it, like, the more ridiculous all this becomes, right? This is the information that's the foundation of everything, right? The foundation of treatment and for school-based services, eligibility for services, and this is what people have to go on to make those decisions, right? So I'm bear with me, please. It's hard. Again, there's 30 pages of this. I'm only highlighting a few, but there are a couple other here, just for the sake of it, because this next one actually had to do with this child's area of disability. So this is actually really important, And so this says auditory and visual processing, short-term memory, Excluding phonological processing, it is now its own processing area, includes auditory memory span, the ability to maintain information in primary memory and immediately reproduce it in the same sequence in which it was presented. Okay, what? I mean, in all honesty, I'm not trying to like butcher the reading of it. I mean, I'm trying to read what it, just read it, right? The way it says, what it says, and the way the sentence is structured, right? So this student's performance on recalling number strings was better when they are said closer together, 0.5 seconds for memory for digits versus 1 second interval for number recall. It probably also explains why he did well on nonsense or non-word repetition, as it is given at a normal speaking rate. Okay, my God, right? Okay, this is directly related to the child's area of disability, and even sort of highlighting, I suppose, a relative strength here. What? And how is a parent or a teacher supposed to pick that up? What the heck does that mean? How is that in any way related to how my child is learning? And the fact is it is. That's the scary part, right? Like, this actually is really particularly relevant information to this child's learning, and yet that's what they have to go on, right? It's crazy. So I'm sorry, I'm going to go here a little bit further. You can see my emotion in this starting to come out a little bit, so I should probably temper it a little bit. Not try to, I'm going to like, oh man, I'm probably going to frustrate like every person in my field right now. I'm not trying to do that. Honest to God, I'm not trying to do that. I understand. This is, and frankly, this is how people are taught to do it. So it's not even like it's their fault, right? Like, this is how were taught to do it. And frankly, other people they work with understand what they're saying. It's just those other people that they work with aren't doing anything to help the kid, right? That's the problem, right? I mean, there are some planets in which this makes sense, right? Like I inhabit one of them. I can read this report and it makes sense to me. But nobody else in the world understands on every other planet, right? Like, only the people on that little, very tiny planet understand that. Nobody else anywhere understands it. So here we go, right? Now, this is the last part of this I'm going to read, okay? God, I'm just tired of reading it. I'm going to read this. Now, I want you to bear in mind while I read this that this is probably one of the most important parts of this report. This is how it talks about how this child qualifies for services, right? Because the child needs some really significant help, to be honest with you. And this is the sentence that says how they qualify for services, right? And bear in mind that when I read this is one sentence, okay? One sentence, okay? This report also finds support for SLD, as he is found to have a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes, in parentheses, include attention, visual processing, auditory processing, phonological processing, sensory motor skills, cognitive abilities, including association, in parentheses, specifically orthographic processing, close parentheses, conceptualization and expression, end parentheses, and is correspondingly not achieving adequately for the pupil's age or to meet state-approved grade level standards, oral expression, listening comprehension, written expression, basic reading, reading fluency, reading comprehension, mathematical calculations, and or math problem solving, parentheses, all of the following in bold are greater than 1.5 standard deviations, plus or minus a standard error of 4, close parentheses. What the hell? I'm sorry, like, that was, what? Like, how is my child eligible? Why? Like, that was the sentence. And believe, a sentence, like, that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines. 10 lines of regular type, right? Sentence explaining the eligibility and why. So, I don't know. That's just, like I said, sort of one of my pet peeves here, right? And so one of the things that I'm really excited to be able to do, I hope that it's going to be of value to you, is when you tune in, we'll have a chance to actually explain all this stuff in a way that makes sense, right? So that you as a parent or as a teacher don't have to go off of this. And this is one of the best in the field, right? don't have to go off of that when making decisions around what your child needs, whether that's special education services or 504 accommodations, and then more importantly, right, what those services should be, right, or what those accommodations should be. So anyway, I don't know. I feel like I tortured you. But if you're listening to this as a parent or a teacher, you've been tortured before, right? Because you've seen things like that in the past. And so what I'm trying to offer you here is a little bit of hope, right? And a helping hand in understanding what your child's report says or what your student's report says. And frankly, if you are a testing psychologist, a school psychologist or neuropsychologist listening to this, I mean no offense at all, right? I hope you take this in the way in which it is intended. It's to say, hey, like, you're super smart. You went to school for a really long time. You have access in your mind to information that 99.9% of people in the world don't have, as illustrated by the fact that the report makes no sense, right? Like you know what that report means and nobody else does, right? And so this is just my heartfelt encouragement. Let's start changing it up a bit. Let's start writing these reports for the people they're designed for, right? For the end user, the actual consumer of the report, right? Which is a parent and a teacher. Let's write it for them, since they're the ones that are on the ground doing the actual work. So anyway, what I really hope, of course, is that you come back to listen to future episodes, because we're gonna have a chance to go through this stuff and make it make sense, because Lord knows that didn't, and I want it to, because I care about your child, and I care about their success, and if there's anything that I can do that would be helpful in any way, I want to be able to do that. So please come back and join me again, and look forward to doing it. Take care.